Okay, Mr. Graff, you had a problem, and I'm here to try to solve that for you. The problem, as you described, is that when you come down here in your swept features, your swept cut feature, and the ball that's going to be traveling down here, it comes down here at a point, and it doesn't smoothly transition in here. So my solution is going to be to try to truncate that helix a little bit sooner, try to put in a curve that is going to be tangent over here and then tangent to some reference geometry that you see I sketched in over here in order to provide that smooth transition. So let's take our rollback bar and roll this back a little bit. What I did is started from the very beginning. I started with the right sketch over here in the right plane, and I created some reference geometry, and we have two perpendicular center lines in here that represent geometry. It's kind of good that when you put in this sketch geometry together that you have some sort of reference to be able to guide off of that. Of course, that's going to be the diameter of the shaft that you have in here. So with that, I put in a front sketch. And this line represents that front plane, what I call top plane, I should say. No, right plane. Right plane number 2. You put that plane in there, but I renamed it to right plane number 2 because this line represents right plane number 3. And you have a helix going between these two planes. And then a top sketch kind of does something very similar, but at an angle to that, so we could actually put in some reference geometry. From the front sketch and the top sketch, I created a plane and I put in a right plane 3 reference sketch. And the only element on that sketch is going to be the center line using existing sketch geometry in here. So when we put in that helix, it's going to be this center line that's going to provide that tangential transition from your helix up to this line, and it's going to actually stop at this line too. And then you're going to do the helix down the other side. So we're trying to put in this sketch geometry in here in order to allow that smooth transition. So we're going to rebuild that. Now that we have all that sketch geometry in here, I'm going to go ahead and keep your shaft. And then I'm going to put in some additional elements in here. You had your right plane number 2 down here, and I just called that right plane number 2. And then you have your helix in here. And with that helix, we're going to go ahead and create a 3D sketch. So that 3D sketch is actually going to look something similar to this, but let me just demonstrate to you how we're going to do that. So what we want to do is we want to be able to create some sketch geometry. We don't want to necessarily rely on helix because we can't really do much with that helix. It's kind of static. It's in its own little world over here. But we can borrow that geometry in order to create like a 3D sketch spiral. It's going to be sketch geometry rather than a helix over here, and we can make modifications to that where we can't to the helix. So what we want to do is go to the Sketch tab on the Command Manager. We're going to find the 3D Sketch tool. If you don't have that available, if you right-click over here in the Command Manager and you want to go to Customize, you want to go to Commands, it's going to be under Sketch Commands, and you're going to see it up here. Mine's the 4th item in. What you want to do is just drag it up here to your Command Manager, and you should have that in place. So once it's in place, what you want to do is you want to click on that, and Sketch tab is already open, but you want to go to Convert Entities, and we're going to go ahead and try to select that helix. If you do that, it's going to say Edge over here rather than Helix. But if you go to the green check mark, now we have sketch geometry in here which emulates that helix. What's not really defined in this sketch geometry is the endpoint of that 3D sketch line. So we're going to take that endpoint, we're going to drag that back a little bit. I believe it created a coincident relationship with the surface that we have over here, which is okay. But we want to take that point and that surface over here, this plane over here that I highlighted, the front plane, we're going to make it on plane. We're going to put it right on that plane. So we're kind of truncating this a little bit early. And you can put in other planes in here too and make it terminate in a different way. But the desire here is put in a curve between that point and this point up here, tangent to the helix on that end, and then tangent to this line on this end. That way it kind of smooths out and comes to a nice transition up here at the very top, and then it can continue back downhill on the other side. That's the desire. So with that in place, we're going to put a curve in here. The way we do that is we're going to go up here, we're going to pick a style spline, and we're going to pick one point here. And you want to, just to make sure the spline is actually going to resolve itself in the right direction, we're going to go and press the tab key a little bit until we get something that's a little bit more horizontal. Right now it's kind of going off in a different direction, but this is probably pretty close. So press the tab key until it appears that way, and what it's going to do is going to be roughly equivalent to a plane that might be influenced by the X and Z axis down here. So in an arbitrary location but close to the helix, we're going to go ahead and put a point in there, and then our final point is going to be over here. So now if we rotate that a little bit, you can see what that looks like. Not exactly where we want it to be, but we're going to go ahead and put some relationships in here that's going to help define that a little bit. So rotate that around, kind of get it in pretty close where we want it to be. And yeah, we don't want to add any additional geometry in here, not yet. But we want to take that curve in here, and this line in here of reference geometry, we're going to make that tangent. Yeah, okay, so that didn't quite work out the way we want it. And it's because we put it, kind of put that curve on the inside rather than the outside. Let's go ahead and try that again. So, yeah, that's kind of, I'm almost tempted to redo that. But let's see if we can get it close. We just want it close. And then we're going to find that in a different way and another way. So yeah, let's go ahead and get rid of that. It's just a little bit goofed up. Okay, try it again. We're going to go up here to, in fact, it might be helpful if we did it this way. We'd put it, with that orientation. So we're looking for this point over here at the end point of that line. If we can find that. So between this point and that point. So let's go ahead and do it this way. So again, back to style spline. We're going to go between this point and an interim point in the middle, and then finally that point over here. And then escape. Once you get that second point in there, you should be in pretty good shape. Okay, so let's try that again. We're going to take this curve, that line of reference geometry, we're going to make that tangent. Okay, that worked. Take this curve and curve off that helix. Now let's take our helix and actually tell it to hide. We want to make sure we pick the reference geometry that we put in here, that 3D sketch line. We're going to make these two, and we're going to make those tangent. Okay, so that's pretty close. So now we have two lines in here that represent those points that drive that style spline. These should be black. If they're not black, make sure you redo that tangent relationship in here. And now that they're black, we're going to take these two lines in here, and we're going to make those equal to each other. And what that does is it leaves one last bit of reference geometry we have out here for these style spline points. And it makes that blue, and as long as that's blue, the curve is still going to be blue. We want that fully defined. But now what we want to do is we want to take a point, or actually put a point on that curve, and put that point on the surface. Can't really do that. There's no midpoint in that curve it's going to allow us to select, but we can actually infer that by putting in some additional sketch geometry, and endpoint of line is what we're going to do. So we're going to pick the midpoint of that curve, and we're going to kind of sketch that out in an arbitrary direction. What we don't want to do is we don't want to pick up a relationship like this, where it says along the Z, or parallel to the YZ axis, so we're going to go ahead and delete that. But we do want to make these two perpendicular, those two lines perpendicular. Now we want to take this point and that curve, that style spline curve, we're going to make that coincident. So now it's right there in the middle. And we could take that point, this point here, put that on that surface, and we could tell it to be on that surface. So now we have that perfectly defined. You still might have a minus sign over here in your 3D sketch, just because the bottom point down here still needs to be defined. But if we go ahead and take a look at like this top surface and go normal to it, we can see that that curve is right on top of that cylinder. It's right on the surface of that cylinder. And if you look at the transition here, this transition's tangent, kind of transitions from the helix over here, kind of elevates a little bit, kind of comes over to the top, and eventually becomes tangent to that line. So now we have our path. We have the top part of the path. You have to do something very similar to the bottom part of that. So let's go ahead and rebuild that. Now let's go to our, I think it's our top plane. We're going to go ahead and sketch a profile. So we're going to sketch that out in an arbitrary location. Put a dimension on that. We're going to make that point 1. Take that point and that curve, that style spline curve we just put in. We're going to make that, we're going to pierce that. That puts it in place. Go to the green check mark, and we're going to go ahead and rebuild that. So now we have our profile and our path. So we're going to go ahead and select those first with the control key. Go over here to features, swept cut. We're going to stick with all the default settings and go to the green check mark. So now that helix that we're using with the 3D sketch line, that's right on top of that now, terminating here, is now transitioning to a curve that's tangent to the helix, or the 3D sketch line that's derived from that helix, and to this line over here to provide that nice smooth transition. So now when you put it on the other side, it should transition over here on that side too. You're going to have to do the same thing at the bottom. Terminate that a little bit early. Take that point over here as we done on the top, and then put in that curve down here. And then when you get this one all done, do the same thing on the other side, and you should have that done. So let me know if you have any further questions about this. It might seem a little complicated, but this is a video. You can go back and look at the video and redo this and look at it as many times as you like until you get this right. But if you have any additional questions about this, let me know.